Great. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Designing Dedham 2030 Master Plan Committee meeting for October, meeting number 21 for the group. Thank you, committee members, for joining us again. We are in a Zoom webinar this evening, so a little bit different, but if there are general attendees there, looks like maybe Justin needs to be pulled across and do a panelist. There we are. So if we have members of the public, we'll maybe recognize them later with a question and answer if we need to. Committee members we know well by this point, just have them on the screen now. So thank you all for coming along with us. We'll continue engaging with the committee values that were expressed at the very beginning of this process on the screen. So our agenda this evening, just to dive right into it, we wanted to give a brief meeting. I think this will be a shorter than usual meeting, but we did have some important updates to provide the committee, and I think some conversation to continue from the last meeting about the process from here forward. So first, we're going to review some of the engagement that's occurred. Really good progress on that front. So thank you all for being involved in those events. We'll review some of the feedback we've heard, how that's being integrated into the document. And then also review the important efforts that Carolina Prieto, my colleague, has been performing with the inclusive outreach to residents of color. So that will be, I have a few slides about some of those notes that she's gathered in those interviews. And then I wanted to share with you an example of a draft report chapter as it's in progress, just to get your initial reaction and kind of gauge how you react to it, what you feel about it as we keep going down that road. And then we'll spend some time looking at the timeline and next steps to get us from here to the end. So first, just a little bit about the process. We're well underway in the engagement plan we had set out for ourselves for the fall. It's, I think, been really successful so far. So the Dedham Day, of course, which a lot of you were involved in, that was good engagement with people in person. So really fantastic, different way to get people excited about the plan. We did have the virtual open house on the 5th. Then we had the first of the 2 office hours last week, which I think was also a success. I'll just briefly touch on what that was like. And then we are barreling toward the December 4th community celebration. So here are some images from the Dedham Day, which I think some of you took or contributed to, so thank you for that as well. But really a lot of people at the event. I think overall sounds like it was a lot of fun for the town, but also great for us to have some boards and content available for people to take a look at. We did have a lot of people engaging with the material and with the committee members that were there. Also had this very cool Instagram frame with the hashtag and all of that. So lots of fun involvement. On the virtual open house, well, maybe I'll just pause at each of these and see, did anyone have any thoughts about the, anything they wanted to share about Dedham Day?
Just one thing. I actually heard a reasonable amount of pushback on the idea of density. A lot of people saying to me that I heard, I hate the traffic downtown. If they put up another big apartment mixed use building, I'm going to scream. We've been focused on density as a solution to resolving the housing crisis, but there seems to be a significant, what seems to me sort of a significant community pushback to the idea.
Thanks for sharing that, Andrew. You think that's generalized across, focused on Dedham Square or generalized across the town?
No, it was really particularly in the Dedham Square context. Okay. And I got a certain amount of, I think this is a bad idea, but, I think that's an unpopular view and no one will listen to me about it. So, and I heard that in a context outside Dedham Day as well, where someone came up to me and said, yeah, this is an unpopular view that I don't think this is a good idea and no one will listen to me.
All right. Thank you. Anyone else? Things they heard or experience they had?
This is Nathan. I had a number of people act surprised and say something about communication. It was one person in particular was like, acted like he would have been really interested or was really interested. And he was really kind of drilling me on why we didn't do more to get the word out. And I was trying to press him on like what would have gotten the word out. I think that's something that this team has done really well. And it was just, funny slash, I didn't come up with a good solution, but he seemed very surprised and somewhat off put that it had gotten this far without his knowing about it. And he indicated that he'd been there 15 years and he thought he was involved. So anyways, I heard a number of people who acted surprised, and then one person in particular who was surprised and felt like he should have known, and somehow it didn't get to him. And and then just back to what was mentioned about density. I didn't hear any of that, but for what it's worth, I mean, every single project that goes up anywhere in Massachusetts, I was reading next door today about a Walgreens that's being removed in one of our neighboring towns. I can't remember. Anyways, so that's everybody always says that when it's their town. If they're already there, there's always a big piece of that.
Great, thank you, Nathan. All right, well, I know a number of you were also involved in the virtual open house on the October 5th. We had a decent turnout, not as big, which is probably to be expected in these sort of processes, but we had, depending on the time of the meeting, between 60 and 70 people attending. And so it's a little smaller than some of the other open houses, but I still think a good turnout and a good audience. We, from the conversations that I heard and the notes that I've reviewed, the level of detail in terms of people joining in and getting down to those strategy level ideas was good. The conversations, I think, were very productive. I don't think across the team we heard anyone that was sort of raising question about any of the goals, which we think are pretty solidly established at this point. And most of the conversation was focused on details around the strategies. We got decent feedback, I think, around examples that could be given to help sort of people help illustrate some of the strategies that we're talking about, and also some actions which could occur underneath the strategies based upon a lot of the comments that we've seen. So that, I think, was very helpful in that regard. I'll flip through, well, maybe just pause there for a moment, see if anyone was involved in the October 5th virtual open house, and see if you had any thoughts about how that went from your perspective.
I sat in a little bit. There was one woman who I think lives in the Dedham housing complex. She had some very, very interesting and I thought trenchant things to say about busing and managing that community. And if those are, I hope those are reflected in the notes, because she really kind of wowed me with really perceptive comments.
Great. Okay, I'll just flip through some of the thoughts that we have captured, and by no means are these, the slides I'm about to share sort of a comprehensive reflection of all of the different ideas and thoughts in the conversations, but just to highlight a few. In an economic development, so we did see in some of the notes and conversations, and by the way, the setup with the Jam boards, which we had where people could engage with the Google documents themselves, that was really effective as an approach. And I thought the comments that we received from people typing in directly onto the Jam boards themselves were actually much better comments than those that we were able, not that there were bad comments also captured verbally, but the notes that we gathered from our team were less, I guess, detailed and insightful than the comments that we saw on the Jamboards that people were typing in themselves. So I thought that was a very effective engagement tool for this moment in our plan. Some of the things we heard in economic development, reinforcing an equitable approach to development and sort of meeting the needs and meeting the concerns of each of the neighborhoods. Adding details such as keeping outdoor dining beyond the pandemic. That was something that showed up in a few of the Jamboard comments. details like connecting to Dedham Historical Society Museum's new strategic plan and figuring out ways to plug that into the economic development strategy. On transportation, I think some really useful ideas which we can aren't necessarily going to change a strategy, but can add to and make a little more comprehensive some of the ideas, like questions about snow removal and its impact on walkability. I think that's a great insight, and making sure that those sort of year-round systems are in place. I think a few comments about things like the infrastructure on crosswalks, flashing beacons, and the like. And then other suggestions around enforcement and parking laws. Here's a sampling of the types of things that we saw in land use and zoning and governance. We saw a lot of agreement and support for a systemic revision to the zoning bylaw, sort of a really not just addressing a problem here or there, but really trying to look at it pretty comprehensively. Really also reinforcing the need for more protections and requirements as a part of development review. So making sure that the types of development that are showing up in the town are the types of things that the community would like to see, and also the benefits that should come along with those investments. And then looking at ways to integrate the climate action plan into some of the land use ideas, all really good ideas. And then in governance, again, some things to carry forward from this pandemic time, remote and hybrid meetings, and having the ability to log in and plug in from a computer at home. Some notion about integrating a little more fully systems of the schools with some of the notions, with some of the ideas we have in governance, like the overall calendar, and term limits were mentioned a few times relative to representation in the town governance. Then here are some of the things that we heard in public health and livability, in housing. So heard a few things about youth programming and using that as a preventative measure for risky behavior by the youth. Addressing the health impacts of racism and discrimination, which I do think show up in our goals and strategies, but making sure that those are stressed and prioritized. And then a few comments about, I think in our strategies, we had referenced alcohol as one of the recurring sort of mentions as a risk for the youth, and people encouraged us to expand that beyond just alcohol to other substances as well. And then looking at zoning regulations for housing, the importance of having staff assigned to housing needs. And then for natural and cultural historic resources, more so than the other topics, a decent amount of comments and concern about where the funding comes from for those strategies, and how to make sure that those strategies are able to be implemented with proper resources. Building and climate change. There were a few comments that people were surprised the town had a climate change action plan, which is great. So we're doing a service already by helping get the word out about some of these plans that exist. Under community facilities and services, I think a good discussion and a few comments about elevating schools as a higher priority overall in our write-ups, and then expanding the timeline for projecting needs on the capital improvement side of things beyond 5 years, which is the current sort of protocol, and creating a town dashboard to help track these projects. So all good. That's just a sampling, as I say, but there's a lot of, I think, very fruitful details that are hopefully reflected in the ones I just picked out here. So any thoughts about that type of feedback? So the plan is, we have a lot of inputs on our side of the work going on right now, where we're pulling all these pieces together. With the comments from this most recent open house and the previous open houses, one of the things I will be doing personally is looking back through the chapters as they become a little more firmed up, and comparing them to these various sets of notes and inputs that we have to make sure, A, that we're sort of in alignment with what we've been hearing overall, but B, if there are any of these really good details, which we've learned from residents over all these meetings and conversations, that we can pick up those details and make sure that they're integrated into the appropriate place in the plan. So if there's a nice detail, like I just shared some of those action ideas, they can show up in the actions or be used as an example for some of the strategies. So similarly, I'll just keep rolling on this for a second, but similarly, I wanted to share with you the themes which are highlighted in Carolina's memo. And she's prepared a memo based upon the interviews which she's performed. If you all recall, just to set the context for someone who also might be tuning in to this meeting. So at our previous open houses, we had tracked the demographics. We also at the October 5th meeting did as well. And we found that our racial demographics of the meetings were skewing more white than the demographics of the town. So then to try to address that shortcoming of our engagement with the community, we had identified and performed specifically resident meetings and interviews with residents of color to try to balance that perspective out a little bit, to make sure that we weren't missing anything major from that population, which might have been underrepresented previously in the plan, and to make sure that if there's any, again, specific ideas or thoughts about strategies or actions, that we can leverage those conversations to help add that into the planning as well. So that's been a very good effort. I believe, I didn't get the final number from Carolina, but I think she's somewhere in around the 12 to 15 interview range is what she's at now. She might have one or two left that she wants to do, but that will be concluding very soon. So these were, what she had done was basically compiled, and this was all done anonymously. So I actually don't know who she's interviewed specifically, but she does, and she assures me that they're all real Dedham residents and that it all went very well. So she has all the notes, individual comments anonymized in this memorandum, but then what she's done is she's organized those notes into a series of themes. And so these are some of the themes that show up, which are resulting from a number of comments from a number of individuals. And so there's a recurring theme that in general, there needs to be more discussion around race in the town, which I think we could all agree with, that the town is not sending out inclusive messaging to constituents of color. And there's some more detailed comments illustrating sort of what that perception is about. And that the communication in general needs to be more welcoming. And I think that points to, in the next bullet, what we've really, I think, tackled a lot in the plan already, which is improving town communication and collaboration, the need to diversify programs and offerings by the town and have more equitable practices. So a lot of these bullets that you see on the screen, as I was looking through the notes, I do feel like are reflected in the strategies and goals that we have so far, which I think is good. It's promising for us in our process. What I did see was we could sharpen up some of the language to better reflect some of these themes, or add some specifics in the strategy and goal level, or strategy and action level. The last three bullets, I think, are really very focused on strategies we already have. So representation, both in town staff and governance, and then also making sure that diverse ideas and decision makings are a part of what we're doing. And then just a few more. I think that the top bullet on this screen is probably the one that I do think we don't necessarily need to add a new goal, but I think we do need to add some additional language into the governance and community facilities sections, because we focused in general on the staff of the town and the representation and diversity, but we didn't have as much language about that, including the schools. So the school administration, the school teacher rosters, and that specifically was brought up as a recurring theme in these discussions. So I think that's important for us to highlight, that the schools need to also be matching in representation the demographics of the town. And then the need for more civic engagement in general, more equitable resource allocation across different areas of the town, and people in that case were referring, I think, as neighborhoods were the areas that they were talking about. Housing affordability concerns, which we've heard kind of across the board. Inequitable impacts on youth were some of the themes in some of the comments as well. And then building up support systems for businesses of color. And I think we can add that into, so we talk about support for small businesses, but we could be more specific about also businesses of color as a part of that small business approach. And then making sure, a lot of comments about making sure those businesses have access to capital, and maybe might not have some channels for capital that other businesses, potentially white-owned businesses or others, might have better access to. And then difficulties and stigma associated with riding the bus was another, more of a user perspective on the transit and mobility goals and strategies that we've seen. So any thoughts about how these themes look to you all, or different things that might resonate?
Josh, could I speak up here?
Sure.
I love this section. I think it's some excellent ideas. First comment I want to make is that we have a wonderful citizen and neighbor in our town by the name of Randall Kennedy, who is a professor at the Harvard Law School, who just published a book called Shout It Loud. And he was kind enough to deliver it over to our house the other day, and I'm going through it. But I would recommend that the staff take a look at it, because there's a series of essays and they're absolutely terrific. As you know, he's African-American from South Carolina by birth. There are any number of points where he might be a valuable voice in, reviewing this set of things that you have illustrated, and I could ask him to do that. I did want to harken back, and not specific to, in fact, not actually pertinent to the inclusivity section, but I just couldn't get myself unmuted fast enough on earlier stuff. But I think there's an overarching point, and that is that I would love it if our committee would delegate to our co-chairs the responsibility of acting as a filter for how we express some of the ideas that we have developed, with some political sensitivities in mind. So, for example, not pertinent to the inclusivity section, but just to pick on, for example, the comment made about having term limits. If we, and I think our two co-chairs would be really well suited to do this, and I would entrust them with the sort of nuanced expression that we come out with in the end. If we say certain things that get hackles risen in some quarters of the town, to the effect that they're not listening to other things that are being said, I think that would be a real shame. And so I just would urge that we give our co-chairs the responsibility to think through how this actually works in terms of overall big picture political engagement. It's well and good for us on the committee to say we believe in 20 different things, but if we undermine the overall impact because we fasten on some, inadvertently on some expression of something that is just going to cause the whole project to be, sort of engaged in controversy, I think that would be a shame. So that's my generalized comment. I could get more specific. I tried to give one illustration of it. And I'm sorry I'm a little late in doing it. It does not pertain to the inclusivity section, but it does pertain to just looking at the whole picture and trying to be sensitive to the fact that we are trying to move our town forward, and we don't want to get caught up inadvertently in something we don't realize causes controversy.
Yes, Sharna. Thank you. Sharna.
So I just want to address a little of what you just shared, Shaw, and thank you for sharing your thoughts on that. As I read through this presentation today, I had a lot of heartfelt emotions about the content and feeling very proud of this work. But I caution expecting our co-chairs to be the champions behind this, because then they will become the targets by a certain faction of individuals in our community. And I don't think it's fair to leave them out there to become those targets. And I think that's exactly what will happen. So I think if we as a committee are going to put this forward, I think we all need to stand behind it equally and share how emphatic we are about moving these initiatives forward. And that's really all I want to say.
I actually agree with you on that, Sharna, exactly. I mean, I do think that's a very important point, but I'm just thinking that as we sort of add real maturation to the words, if we could ask our co-chairs to help us as a group be the filters how to best translate these ideas to the whole town, it would be a very valuable contribution by them to our work. I don't disagree with you at all, but I do think that, you know, they're just politically well positioned. They understand what's going on in a way by reason of their responsibilities, and you know, we would benefit from getting that nuance added to our work. So believe me, I do not want to be left on a plank all by themselves. That's not what I'm saying. But I do think they could really help us. And as we get to the full expression of what we want to do.
Well, I think even beyond our co-chairs, I think we need to have the select board get behind this. I think that is going to send an even stronger message.
Well, that's what I'm thinking.
The entire select board, not just our two co-chairs, because I've seen one of them become a target, and I just don't want to see that have to happen to her again.
Okay.
Can I interject too, just because this is you know, something that I think Jess and I have been thinking about. And to me, it's different than a process that the select board just went through in the charter change, right? Which was we have 3 to 5 recommendations, and what are the chances of these being kind of supported up or down at various stages in a process. I think the one difference here is that this is incredibly rich and incredibly connected, in that, you know, no recommendation, at least I would like to see a plan where no recommendation can actually be kind of shot up or down on its own, just like one face or one issue. Like, I think we've done a lot of work to draw context and connection between these things. So I appreciate what Shaw's saying, and just, I think having a lens towards anything that's unnecessarily either inflammatory or controversial, like I do, or you know, not legal or not, you know, any number of things. But I also think, you know, ultimately, when I explain this plan to people who haven't been involved, it's not just a list of 10 things I want to see done, right? It's actually a very sort of interconnected vision for the town, which I do think makes it less, not that it won't be targeted, but less subjected to that kind of like up or down court of public opinion. I may be wrong, but that's kind of like how I've been talking to people about it. I frame it a little bit differently than here's 10 things we want to change.
That's good. It's good discussion. I think it's a little bit of a segue into the next discussion we had, which is a little bit about the process from here and the framework. And I think as we get to a point very soon where we're giving you all draft chapters for the document and you all are reviewing them, I think one of the ways to look at that review would be to do something similar to what Shaw outlined, which is to look for those hot button issues or phrases or things that you all may know are long, legacy conversations, which people have are the third rail in the community, which we might not like. Term limits seem fine enough for us to say, but that might have a whole history in the town, which we don't know about, which you all do. And so there might be a way to rephrase that or do it differently, just as an example. But I think that would be one of the ways which we could benefit from your review and looking through the language, is to highlight some of those things, not to say like, we're going to highlight all these things so that we can remove anything that's controversial, but to highlight them to make sure that we really are being purposeful in what we put out there, and to make sure that it's not taking away from the whole, but also using the right language to get people to understand what we're saying. Andrew.
As I understand the process, which may not be correct, doesn't this get adopted by or not by the planning board ultimately?
Yes, and I think the process which is shaping up, and maybe Jessica or Sarah can also give their impressions, but I think what would effectively happen is we'll go through our process where we sort of draft with your help and redraft and get it out there into the public. We'll gather public comments. We will work with you all as a committee to sort of quote finalize this draft. And then the committee will effectively be presenting this work to the planning board for the planning board then to accept and adopt. And then from there may be there might be a desire to do something with it at town meeting, to do something with it at the select board, but it really is, the initial step is from committee to planning board.
But
if I could interject, I'm sorry to speak over somebody else, but Sharna's point is well taken in that when she said she'd like to get a select board to buy into this. And likewise, the whole planning board, not just, some minority to buy into this. And the point is that there will be a section that'll deal with recommendations and implementation, as was the case with the last plan. And it was there that, if Sarah remembers, that there were many critical and really important things that were undertaken by the select board of that time. And they will be called upon to do such again, I'm sure, in connection with this effort. So ultimately, it is the planning board's document by state law and by town bylaw. It is also the case that the select board will have a material role to play in the implementation.
But that being the case, I'm not sure, understanding Sarah's intention with the best of intentions to introduce this as an up or down vote for the planning board, adopt or don't adopt, don't fiddle, to take care of Sharna's concern that it gets piecemeal. I'm not sure that you can't prevent someone from proposing a motion that it be adopted except for chapter 2. I'm not sure. You may be able to try to get it up or down vote, but I'm not sure in the end we don't have control over that process. At least I don't. Maybe Sarah, you're a voting member of the planning board, so you have some input, but the rest of us.
Yeah, and I wasn't suggesting that this will be subjected to an up or down vote. I just think the way it's presented and all of the context of how we got here is important as we can't drop that. All of the context we've been giving meeting after meeting, we can't all of a sudden jump to here's a final plan. This is what we're recommending for all eternity. So.
Jessica.
And I would add, I think there's, there's ways in a final plan to kind of make it clear, even if there are some ideas which may be, I mean, for one thing, I just think in these days, it's hard to know what's going to be controversial, right? And so I think we have to, that a part of our job, I guess the way I see my role, so just speaking for myself, is that we've gone out to the community, we've gotten a lot of great feedback and great information, and we're coupling that with the work of these expert planners in all of these different fields. So we're kind of combining, the research and data, best practices, and professional views of the future with the, what the community wants. And so there may be some ideas that the community wants that some, not all the community will want it, right? I mean, Andrew, you talked about kind of different perspectives on, density and housing, and a lot of the topics that are in the plan are fraught, right? I mean, I think we all know that, and particularly from the work that we've been doing, right, that there's a real need to have housing, missing middle and affordable housing in town. It's not a topic that most people say they want, that, and certainly it's not, and there's all sorts of academic research, right, that people don't go to meetings and say like, I want more affordable housing. That's something that tends to have to be led by, planners and leaders. And that's, I think, what this group is. So I think there's ways that we can be really sensitive in terms of, if there's something that seems like it might be a hot button, to make it clear that it's coming from the community, to make it clear why it's there, what the advantages are. And I think, Josh, you did a good job earlier in just kind of talking about like, what are the connections? So, we're not just if the planner were to suggest term limits as the one that's been brought up, it's not just it suggesting term limits, is about term limits being one tool that gets to the objectives that, we've set based on what the community said. So I think, but I do think it kind of points to, for all of us, and Josh is going to tee up what the next few months are going to look like, is just kind of reading, as we start to read things, is kind of reading both for content and for that tone, the level of kind of explanation behind, making sure that the ideas are explained, and wherever we can, I think, to make ties. So even just, I always think about these kinds of things as almost being an intervention or a strategy in and of themselves, right? And so Josh mentioned at the open house that there were people who hadn't realized that there was a climate action plan. And I'm not surprised by that. It came out in the middle of COVID. There has been no real publicity about it. And, and so that was an intervention in my field, is how I would call it, to just help people understand it exists. And so I think part of the reading of the plan and these kind of draft chapters is going to be thinking about, like, is all of the subtext explained here? Are there things, are we writing this in a way that's accessible to everybody, that doesn't assume people already have a certain knowledge of town government or the reports that have come out before? That was a very long-winded response. And I actually had my hand up about something else. So I'm sorry. Can I, if no one has, if I've just shut everybody else up, can I just, Josh, so I don't want to go over Carolina's findings in terms of all of those interviews. And so partly, and this is something we can also talk about a little bit offline, but I want to make sure that we're protecting the confidentiality of the people who she's spoken to. And I understand that means not sharing, probably at a certain level of detail, the comments and information with the committee. At the same time, as I was reading some of this, I have to admit, there were some things where I thought, like, oh, it'd be so nice for some people who are already working in town hall, like, for instance, Amanda Smith, our chief, public information officer. I would love for her to be able to see some of this before it gets filtered and organized through the plan. And so I just kind of wanted to plant that of, like, that work that Carolina has done is so valuable. And so I don't know that this is the right time or meeting. I think she should be a part of that conversation, but I just want to tee up for the future that I just want to make sure that we're leveraging that data in every way that we can, again, with the, with in a way that preserves confidentiality.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think my read of that document is that it's not, there's no identifying information in it, but I would, we should definitely check with Carolina in terms of her comfort level with that. But I agree, it would be a good document to share with you all. And it's, you know, instead of just as a slide, you can see all the comments that flow underneath these themes, and it would be good to share with others as well. It's a lot of great work. So in terms of how this gets processed for the plan document itself, we will have a robust description of all the efforts we've gone through over the last 2 years. There will be a write-up for these interviews, why these interviews occurred, and we'll probably take most of these themes that are on these 2 slides and just kind of put those right into that section so people can see them highlighted. But then we will also be integrating these to make sure that we're sharpening the strategies and actions underneath to align. But again, the conclusion I drew from this review was that there wasn't, and I think I feel a little, I guess, reinforced or strengthened. I think our efforts are strengthened by it, but I didn't see any sort of huge missing blind spot or like a whole topic area that wasn't yet addressed. But I did see a lot of very helpful details that we can add in to make sure that the strategies and goals we did have already are more directly addressing the very specific concerns which were raised by the residents of color in these interviews. So that's very important work. I think what I'm going to do actually is skip through this for a second, because we had just talked so much about the process. And I think we'll start with talking about the process, and the discussion we were just having is a good segue to that. But what we're really doing now is focusing on these last, 2 or 3 months, if you count October. And so we've expanded those 2 or 3 months. So now you're looking at a calendar on a weekly basis from this week, October 18th, all the way through to the beginning of January. And our proposal is to provide you all with chapter drafts starting at the end of next week, where we would be basically endeavoring to provide you 2 drafts per week for about a 5-week period. And so that would be chapter drafts for transportation and connectivity and housing and public health and livability. So each of those topics we've been talking about this whole time are effectively turning into a chapter of this document. And so you would be getting about 2 per week. And then we would also be throwing into that mix the introductory chapter, which would include, the very basics, like what is a master plan? What has this process been about? Outlining the whole process, the engagement efforts, some general demographics, touching on Shaw's favorite topic of the Census 2020 and what that data means and how that's integrated. So all that stuff. And then we'll also be pulling in the vision, which I think Jeremy did share with you some of the components of that vision section. It's not there in its entirety, but some of that's starting to get formatted how it might look in this document. And then also the implementation section, which would be the final section of this whole plan. And that usually it's very typical to organize that in a table. And that's usually the best way to approach it, because it's a lot of detailed information that flows from the goals to the strategies to actions to responsible parties, timeframes, and potential resources. So that will probably come last. And that one, I think, is a little bit, that one we have, our ambition is set in terms of trying to get that for that final week of towards the end of November. But I think we'll probably be able to pull that together as well. So we've got a lot in front of us on our side in terms of getting all the information pulled together. I feel like it is doable, but we do have a lot of moving parts going on in the next few weeks. And then the ask on your side is, would you feel comfortable with this sort of approach where you're getting 2 drafts a week to be able to not feel flooded by all this information in these chapters, but also to feel that you can review the things that you feel you need to review, provide comments, or to provide that look, as we were discussing in our previous conversation, if there are red flags you want to raise, if something just doesn't seem right, if something doesn't reflect the process from your view. Those are the types of things that would be very helpful for us to know. you're in providing the review like this, I imagine it almost like a soft launch, that you all have been with us along for the whole ride. You know all the context, you know the backstory. And if some way that a topic or strategy or goal is presented in this final write-up doesn't sit right, then this is the time to let us know and we'll take another look at it. That's all of that said, much of this information you've seen already. So you've seen the goals, you've seen the strategies, you've seen the overall existing conditions themes, you've seen a lot of the information at the various presentations at the meetings. So it shouldn't be like you're getting a whole bunch of brand new stuff in all these chapters. So I guess maybe it's a reasonable time, before we get into some discussion, maybe Michelle, if you want to just pop up that poll question about how people feel about this approach, that would be helpful.
How long would we get with each piece of language, and what days of the week? And I'm thinking about blocking out time on weeknights to read and comment.
Yeah, that's a good question. That's a good question. So I think, Andrew, on that, the idea here is, I don't think we're asking for too quick a turnaround, at least on the early chapters. The bottleneck will be as we get closer to the December 4th celebration, where we do want to have some of these, if not all of the topic chapters, available for the sort of a more public release at that celebration on December 4th. So as we get towards the end of this sequence, it'll be the last few sections that really get pinched. The first sections, you'll have a good 3 or 4, 5 weeks to take a look at. And then as we approach the end, it's the turnaround will get tighter and tighter. My hope is that we will all get a little bit better at this as we get past the first 2 or 4, and we'll be able to anticipate and integrate some of the comments maybe we're already seeing into the format or the way things are, the way the language is written, or, whatever it may be. We might be able to cut you off a little bit before you get there on the later chapters.
The usual question about homework: when's it due, and how long have I got to work on it?
Yeah, and then so we're doing it. It's the other relief valve is that we're working toward we've put the December 4th date out there, as we were talked about it all. Jeremy, Michelle, Jessica, Sarah, and I, we feel comfortable that that's still a reasonable date for us to aim for. It works well with the overall schedule of the process. We still do have the ambition to try and keep this mostly in the 2-year timeframe, which was originally outlined. But we are basically rumbling toward a comment period, which we're probably thinking at this point with the holidays will probably be about a 45-day comment period. And that'll be a public comment period. So the other option we have too, if you don't get to review a certain section before, say, December 4th, you're certainly welcome to take another look at something in that same comment period. We'll be doing the same thing just to make sure, checking for typos, other errors, whatever the case may be. Maybe we'll probably have a little bit of a to-do list identified ourselves of things that we didn't get to, or graphics that could be better. And then we'll be also trying to address those things during that 45-day comment period. So there's still some work going on in the background. And then when we get all the comments, there'll be a poll process of collecting those. I'm sure we'll have a check-in with you all about what are the overall comments looking like. Are there some that we need to talk about before we address them? There are others that we will be able to just address, but there might be some where we need to just have a discussion about some of the themes that show up in the comments as well. All right, so it looks like the poll is back, so I'll end that. So it looks like 2 of you are concerned about the time. So if you're comfortable, I'd be happy to hear a little bit more about those concerns if you do want to tell us.
I have a question actually about the second one. which is weather dependent. My happiness with being in crowds of people goes up if it's outdoors.
Oh, I didn't realize they're both in the same one. Oh yeah, so let me just give you a little background on the second question on this poll. So we are, the December 4th celebration event, ideally, I think would be a better celebration if it were an in-person hybrid event. So we would have an in-person component. We're looking at spaces in the town hall, spaces at the Motherbrook Community Center, spaces at potentially one of the schools, but we're not sure if that's an option totally yet. And so there would be an in-person component, probably masked and, you know, with all this, as many safety features as we could provide, but given the time of year, I think it would be an indoor space, as big as indoor space as we could get. And then we would also be both having a parallel Zoom live stream and a Zoom recording of that presentation and session. So that, yeah, so basically is a question about how you're feeling about the pandemic and COVID and in-person meetings at this point. So that's very helpful feedback too. So it looks like overall we have decent comfort level with the schedule and approach to this sort of staggered release of draft chapters internally for discussion and review. And then we also have a decent comfort level with an in-person meeting. Though some of you think it would be a good idea, but may not attend yourselves, which is understandable. And the format for that meeting, we're still working out, but it's likely that it would be a little more traditional meeting where we're really jumping up again to a higher level, and we're providing an overall presentation, which would give people from sort of top to bottom a feel for what the master plan is all about. So we'd be going over the process, the vision, the goals, the strategies, touching on all the topics. And that presentation is probably going to end up landing somewhere in like the half hour or so time frame. I don't know if it's going to be possible to do all that information in much less. Then we would probably have some sort of panel Q&A. And our initial thinking on that is that it might be very effective to have committee members be a part of that panel. So however the room is set up or whatever it is, but that we would have our team and committee members sort of there representing this process and have that be sort of the face, have us all be the face of this plan, and hopefully maybe contribute to some of the comments or questions that arise. And then after that more formal setting, we would be able to break that meeting down into a little more of the informal celebratory aspect, where we do a little more in-person mingling or engaging. We have some snacks or food. I'm not sure exactly how all that will work. Maybe we retreat to some sort of outdoor food sharing or something that's a little safer, who knows, but we'll get into the details of that, but that would be the basic outline of what that event might look like. Any thoughts or questions about any of this stuff?
I have a general comment, which is from the end of November, roughly, call it December 1, until town meeting, which occurs in May, is approximately 6 months. And in that period, the planning board is going to have sufficient time to digest and query and maybe have more than one session devoted to the actual draft in toto. I don't know what Jessica would say in terms of the number of meetings and that might logically be scheduled by the planning board. But working from sort of May 1 back to December 1, May 1 being a time when you actually have both an electronic and live piece of paper for, in the latter case, for the general public's digestion, but it is the final thing. In that 6 month period, you've got a series of planning board meetings devoted to the drafts and so on. That suggests to me that we want to be somehow respectful of the planning board process and allowing them the time to digest and comment and make specific recommendations and all that sort of thing that may alter the work of this committee in whatever respect. And the celebratory piece that segues into that process. So all that says to me is that at the celebratory moment, we should not get, too much of a quote final draft, close quote, in circulation, because I suspect there's going to be some work, in translation to the planning board meeting. Somehow, I think what you suggested, Josh, is that there be a somewhat higher level presentation with pieces of paper, albeit, but without all the language that may be going to the planning board. I think that's what you're saying, but I'd be sensitive to that intersection between the final public input and then the planning board deliberation. And that's my cut at it. I don't quite know the nuance yet, but after I see the drafts, I think I'll have a better sense of it.
Well, just to clarify, the intention would be to basically provide to the public any of the pieces of the final document or the draft document for review and comment at that point. They will certainly be labeled draft, and they will certainly be understood as continuing to be work products. That's why we're having a genuine comment period to invite people's thoughts on these, and those thoughts can be integrated and still have an impact on the plan document. But we would be basically releasing all of the content at that point, that we wouldn't be holding anything back.
Well, I'm not against releasing content at a particular moment in time, but what I'm saying is that I think there has to be a sense that the planning board begins to take over that process, if you will. And I just haven't quite figured out the nuance of that. But if you're going to get ownership by the whole planning board, you've got to get them to the point where they feel they're embracing that not every word in the draft, but they're embracing the process by which you're getting the comment period. Do you understand that they're sort of begin to be in charge of that dialogue with the general public? And I'm sorry, I'm just not being astute enough now to think about which day we're talking about. But I don't want to, mess things up by having a comment period that then, the planning board says, well, that's all well and good, but we're in charge of actually aggregating all the comments, not the committee.
Yeah, so Shaw, I think that's good, is kind of a good thing to just check in on and check the assumptions. And I'll certainly double check with our chair to see if he'd want to have a larger role. But my sense now is that what this plan that Josh is presenting actually, is what the planning board would appreciate, right? That we'll go in, report, give them an update before the comment period. They're, certainly be happy to, I'm always happy to meet with everybody just one-on-one to take them through anything they have questions for. And, but I don't think that the planning board, I would be surprised if the planning board members want to kind of own the public comment period, because I think that's something that they see that they have set this committee up to do, right? And we have the, kind of to the fantastic support of Josh and MAPC to do that. So, so I appreciate the intent in terms of the planning board really getting behind it and having a sense of ownership, for the plan. I don't think, though, that that's going to mean that they're going to want to kind of own that process itself.
Well, in that event, I think that's perfect. But I think what needs to be done, though, is as you're suggesting, Jessica, a little bit of tilling of the ground beforehand too, so that they're not in a place where they can act shocked or something by some of these documents that emerge. That, in other words, that this is the committee's work. They embrace the idea, and it is really concurrently their idea to have this comment period, and then move beyond the comment period, and then they become, planning board, as you say, at the edge of the chart, becomes the ultimate quote author, close quote, of the final work. But I just think it's important to make sure you get the planning board feeling as if the comment period is something that they're blessing with the committee. That's all.
Yeah, I mean, I think I would even extend it, it would be hopeful that they would also use that comment period, right? That's a great time for them to engage on the content, and add other ideas to it. So.
Okay, well, we'll I think those are all good insights, and we'll continue to add a little more detail and talk about this in our core team meetings, as we call them. So the two other things I wanted to highlight about this approach. We did talk previously about having a survey in the fall, sort of an endpoint survey. And what we've done, just to reduce the number of moving parts and put it in a more productive place, we will make that survey a part of the comment period and use it as a tool to invite the comments. So we'll set up basically a survey that's companion to the draft chapters. It will have some questions, some asks about how people feel about chapters, have a place for open comments, have a place for some prioritization of goals. And so that would take place and sort of be launched with the comment period at that celebration event. So I think that's a good adjustment. And then the other thing I haven't mentioned yet, which is a major part of our work in the next couple of weeks, are focus groups. And so we have invited 7 focus groups around the topics of the master plan. And those are, I would consider the stakeholders. So of the different topics, it's like the DPW and engineering department for transportation, and the transportation committee, and others around natural culture and historic resources, all of those stakeholders, including the Dedham Historical Society, and all of those groups, the chair of the Open Space and Recreation Committee, all those, anyone that you could imagine that's associated with that topic. We've invited those people to come join us to discuss the draft goals and strategies for that topic. And we hope to get very good feedback from those individuals and use it in the same manner, which we would be hopefully adding some detail to strategies and actions based on those perspectives. And also in those conversations, what we're hoping is to help those stakeholders learn about where the master plan's at, hopefully help them to be on board a little bit with what the content is, and take some ownership if that's the case as we move towards implementation. So those will be, we're hoping, very helpful. And they start Thursday of this week, and then the majority of them are next week. All right, so we did those questions. And I just wanted to go back and I guess I'll stop sharing this, but I wanted to preview. We've gone over the overall outline of the plan, which we're working on, the document itself. And I wanted to share the transportation chapter with you because that one's pretty far along, and I wanted to get your initial reaction. And then that's, I think, the last thing on the agenda this evening. So we're not quite to first pitch yet, but we're very close. Let me pull up that document. So you see some of the sort of graphic language which has been established throughout this process with the color coding of the topics, the prism sort of approach. And so this is the transportation and connectivity chapter. This is a framework for the layout of the content, which I think is pretty able to be pretty closely followed by each of the different topics. The introductory chapter and the implementation chapter might be a little bit different, but the core of the work will be in this sort of framework. So there'll be a brief introduction, which explains what the topic is about in that first cover page. And then for each chapter, we're offering a very simple and straightforward sort of orientation to what that chapter is about. And we're imagining the way that master plans sometimes get used is people will actually just, they won't have the whole document in some cases. They will actually just have the chapter that they're related to or most interested in. And that would be just fine if they focus in on, if they are related to the transportation field. We're trying to make this, have it the ability that it could be pulled out as a standalone thing. It can be a part of this bigger document, but it would work either way. So we give a little orientation for what's going on in the chapter. We do have a inlaid box here where we talk about other companion documents and studies just to give people a roadmap to the universe of work that's already occurred. And then for each chapter, we're trying to pull out up front terms that are specific to that chapter. So we're defining transportation terms that might show up later that people might not be as familiar with. So we're trying to make this as accessible and highlight any of the jargon or language up front. And then this is where it should start to look a little more familiar. And you'll see a lot of the transportation themes, which showed up on that topic summary, which we shared, must have been back in the very beginning of this year. I think it correlated with the open houses we had over December, January, and March. So you see the various themes, which were highlighted from all of the data and analysis and the conversations with the community. And we've tried to, provide that in language which is not too meaty, but kind of gets to the point, is trying to be succinct and organized, but then also pulls out some key information with an infographic or a highlighted quote or a photograph or a map as we get through kind of illustrating these various data points. And so for each of those, we had the main themes which were highlighted previously. And then this is a section which I think will also occur for each of the topics or almost each of the topics that we're calling additional context and data. So this is additional background data, which doesn't show up in those, it might support some of those themes, but it doesn't show up as directly in the themes. So we talk about, in this case, some of the vehicle ownership statistics, journey to work data, a little bit more information about the existing transportation networks. So it's additional background data, and some of the additional maps show up here as well. So these just help to round out people's understanding of what's happening in this transportation topic. Talking about some of the current transportation improvement projects, the public transit assets, and then some of the other programs and policies that are underway. And then these are really baked into the themes that are the very front of the chapter, but the community priorities, which were highlighted most in the community surveys, we wanted to bring back and highlight again here. So those show up again, but they're really, as I say, they're baked into the major themes. And then from there, we shift to the most recent work that we've been outlining and working through with you all, which is the goals and priorities of the strategies. And so those will be about a page or two for each one, with some photographs that go along with it, or maybe some diagrams in some cases that lay out the various ideas. And then in this chapter, we're not going to highlight every single action that comes along with the goals and strategies, but we do want to highlight, say, 3 or 4 for each topic, where we call them critical next steps. And we're trying to pull out some really high priorities. And then this, as it says in the write-up here, is coupled with a more comprehensive implementation table, which will be a different chapter of the plan. And that implementation table endeavors to have a action, at least one, underneath every single strategy. And that action would be associated with a time frame, a responsible party, and a resources, if any of are available, either funding resources or just sort of guidance resources. So this write-up is basically a snapshot of 3 or 4 of those pieces from that table. And that's basically, even with all that effort to try to keep it tight and succinct, you can see this is a 30-page single chapter, so that it's going to be a substantial document. I would say that perhaps not all chapters will be in this 30 range, but I would say we'll probably have difficulty getting any of the chapters down much below 20 pages. So you can imagine how, as you get to 8 different topics, and then we have the front end and the back end, it will be overall a meaty document. That's why I think it's important for each of these chapters to also stand alone, so that people don't feel, if you give them the full PDF or website or however this is finally displayed, if you give them the whole thing, they're going to get lost in hundreds of pages of information. But if you know someone's interested in transportation, and we can give them this section, which also works as a standalone piece, then I think that's, giving someone 30 pages is much more accessible. So I'll stop. But what are your thoughts about this approach? And it would be very useful to help guide us, because we've got a lot of these going on. We want to course correct as early as we can. Justin, yeah.
I'll say visually, and I'm looking at it as much smaller than the actual copy would be, but visually it doesn't look daunting. I'm not running away, which is the first sort of flip through. It looks like there are areas where there's content, but you sort of understand that there's stuff that has to be said there, but interspersed with the charts and maps and things, just graphically, to me it's looking quite nice, and it's looking digestible. So even within that 30 pages, it looks as though you can sort of zero in on certain topics, or one of the sort of subheadings anyway, and take it in pieces. So this looks on the right track to me, for sure.
Great, thanks for that, Justin. Other thoughts?
I love it.
I love it.
That's all I can say. Looks good.
I love it. How's that? And also, I just wanted to mention, Josh, that with reference to the ancillary or related plans that you had in an early box in the 30 pages.
Yeah.
I think it would be useful to have some way of connecting to those documents if a serious reader wanted to do that, without making necessarily appendices, which would turn a 250-page document into a 500-page document.
Yeah, I think that's a great thing about having this as a PDF or on the web-based document. We can definitely do hyperlinks that could link directly to those other companion docs.
Oh, only if they travel together. If you're hyperlinking to things on the web, keeping in mind that this is supposed to be available for 10 years, there's no guarantee that in even 2 years, any of those links will still be live.
That is true. So there will have to be some thoughtfulness in terms of where those documents get placed to link to. But I think with a little foresight, there's hope that they could last at least for a few years.
I also like this format, though. I will admit personal predilection, perhaps, but I find the entire page of red a little eye-searing.
On the defining terms. Yeah.
Others may not, but it's just a shade. If it were green, it wouldn't.
This is our least, I would say, friendly of the color in terms of our prismatic
a pretty aggressive red. If we're down to those level of design details, we're in good shape.
The puts transportation on high alert. All right, well, this I've found very promising, so thank you for that encouragement. I don't have to go back to the team at midnight tonight and say, stop the presses, you know, let's back it up. So that's great, because we've got a few chapters underway like this. So then the idea would be, you would get, for example, this chapter, which you can see is pretty close, you would get transportation and another chapter at the end of next week. We would pass it off to you. This is sort of what you will be getting, and then you can take your time with it on your own screen, and you know, read through as much of it as you can, focus on certain parts, however you want to approach it from your perspective. But that would be the idea. And then if you do this, the types of comments you were just sharing with us now, those are the types of things that would be useful. You know, if you say, you know, this page is looking too text heavy, wouldn't it be great if you had a graphic here? Or, you know, is there a map that shows this idea? Any of those types of things, we have some time to try to address some of that.
Josh, not specific to this particular chapter, but, you know, the occasional pretty picture that evokes the town that we know, and it is in this text I saw, is useful.
Yes, and on that front, that's a very good reminder to me. One of the things I wanted to say tonight is to invite each of you, if you have pretty pictures of Dedham that you have on your phone or other places that you've taken over the years, and you wouldn't mind us using them in the document, we can credit you, of course. But if you do have pretty pictures, that's one of the things that we could really use at this point. We have some pictures, and I think we have, you know, maybe we have enough to stretch it across the whole document, but it would be really fantastic if you do have some photographs that you like, and then we can see how they fit in with the various content areas. But that would be really useful. And you can just email those to me if you've got some.
And Josh, you're looking for sort of just a stream of comments to be coming back during this 4-week period, right? You're not looking to sort of gather all these at once at the November meeting or something.
No, it's whenever you're able to, if you're, you know, sit down and have a look at a section and are able to put some comments together, that would be fine. And I think as a protocol, I think it's fine to just have people send things directly to me. That's probably the easiest, rather than have a middleman. So yeah, if you get a chance to review, and it could be, I'm not picky. You can put them in an email, you can put them in a Word file, however is easiest. It's the only thing I am a little, it's very helpful if you give me the page number and approximate location on the page of where your comment applies. That's useful to just expedite, to figure out what it is you're talking about and how to address it. But other than that, yeah, it's pretty open. We'll get more. I think at this point now we're at the front end of this whole exchange. The timeline is pretty forgiving. As I was saying before, as we get closer, I think we'll give you a little more guidance in terms of this chapter we're giving to you this week. It would be great if you could give it back to us in 2 weeks. This last round of chapters, we're going to need a quick turnaround. So just be prepared for that a little bit. But we will, anytime we have an expectation that we're going to have a cutoff like that, we'll make you aware of that cutoff deadline.
Josh, one thing I wanted to add is that the committee that's been designated to select the statue of William Gould for placement in the Gould Memorial Park, or whatever it's going to be called technically, is going to review 4 competitive architectural designs pretty soon. I can't tell you which date it is, but it's in the next 6 weeks anyway. And it would be wonderful to have the concept or whatever, the rendering, as decided by the committee, to be part of this picture book, if you will.
Yeah, that would be great. If that's available, we can find a way to integrate that. But I think it would be particularly relevant with the natural, cultural, historic resources strategies.
Absolutely.
All right, anything else about any of the information we've covered tonight? So I think the game plan's pretty clear. We will maybe follow up with the email just so we'll outline it. I guess the best thing to do when we send you those first 2 chapters, we'll outline in a little more detail what you can expect and just give you a little more, reiterate some of the instructions just so everyone's clear. And then we do think that we will, a committee meeting on the 16th of November would be our next meeting. We do think that that is going to be useful. We can try to keep it to be a more succinct meeting as well. But that will be in preparation for the December 4th. We'll also check in about all the, the exchange of reviews that's occurring and anything we can do to help refine that process. But then I don't think we would be meeting as a committee in December. So you would have the month of December to enjoy yourselves and be a part of the comment period if you can do that. And then we will, I think there will be a necessity for us to meet as a committee in the new year as well, and probably on our 3rd Tuesday in January. I think something like that would be appropriate, but we'll put that out there when it gets a little closer. Any other thoughts from our co-chairs?
I like how you said we'll get December off, except all that work you told us we should do. So
Yes. It's a dedicated group. We appreciate all of your efforts.
And Josh keeps sending Jeremy keeps sending the meeting updates by adding the number of the meeting over and over. Like, I think it's like such a habit at this point that I noticed today was 21.
It is a lot of meetings. You will
Does this
you will
mean
all
officially drink during meetings?
Right, exactly. Yes, we've hit that grown-up milestone.
Right. One metric, I don't know if we talked about this specifically, Josh, but it would be good to just talk about like all the volunteer hours that went into this. So if we start, have everyone here kind of estimate at the end, or I don't know if there's one person and we just multiply it by the number of committee members, but just something to kind of show the number of hours that have gone into this, not just in terms of, meetings and open houses, but all of the reviews.
Yes, that's a good point. That would be a nice metric. I don't think we've done that before.
Alex Bregman hit a home run in the top of the 1st, regrettably, but Xander Bogaerts just responded with a 2-run blast in the bottom of the 1st. So Red Sox 2, Astros 1 as of this moment.
Well, with that, I think that's a good segue to end this meeting and make sure that you all can be on your merry way this evening.
Thank you, Josh.
Thank you all. That's a lot
Thanks,
of
everybody.
great feedback.
Yeah. Thanks, everyone.
Good
Thanks,
night.
Josh. Exciting
Looking good.
progress.